So let's say that we're starting to develop this honesty muscle and we're starting to work it out and we're starting to get some traction in the group setting, again, with safe people, in a context like a pure desire group. How does that honesty in group start to flow out into our lives, marriages, relationships, and what should that honesty look like outside of group?
Again, I like that analogy that you guys used of it's kind of like trying on some shoes and practicing and getting them broken in. And so as the guys start to practice that in group each week to week, then it just naturally spills out into the rest of their life. And there's a question that we ask every week: Have you lied to anyone this week, either directly or indirectly? That's part of the group check-in. And so each week they're practicing that, and then that's a point of reflection. Okay, have I been totally open and honest in all my relationships this week? And usually the guy will start, around their primary relationship with their spouse if they're married, and say, "Well, I wasn't totally open and honest about, my seeking behavior, or I had a relapse. I didn't tell her right away, that kind of thing." But then eventually, as it goes along, that starts expanding. Well, I told a white lie at work, or I was got a chicken or a hamburger, and I told my wife I got a chicken sandwich, and realizing that this pattern of lying is much bigger than just around their addictive behavior. I actually had a guy, it's one of my clients, and we are talking about this. He said that in the previous week he had this assignment for work, and his boss asked him, "Hey, did you complete this?" And he said, "Yes," knowing full well that he hadn't completed it. And he's like, in the moment, as it's coming out of my mouth, I'm saying, "Why are you saying that?" type of thing. And he ended up, it turned out to be not a big deal. He's still able to go back with that prompting and complete the assignment, and then finish it. So there's no repercussions over that. But then he just got so convicted that he wasn't totally open and honest in that relationship. They went and told his boss that he had lied to her, and she just kind of brushed it off. But that shows that progression of, we start to self-center after a while in groups, and our window of tolerance for both acting out and lying starts to narrow. And I think that's really the power of a group to hold us accountable in these areas. And it kind of just naturally spills over.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's spot on, Brent, that we've been so focused on maybe this one area of our life that we've been so secretive about. We know we've been lying. And it's like when that gets out there, we feel like, oh man, there's honesty finally. And yet what we've missed is that in that desire, kind of that protective personalities wearing a mask, we've been doing image management all over the place, from like how
Yeah.
we use our time, why are you running late? What were you doing? And just not being aware of how that's become a way of life. And when that gets exposed, it is humbling. And that's the word I was thinking about, was just, this is an opportunity to develop humility, because I know in that recovery process, there are many times I had to go back to people, to my spouse, and say, I realized I wasn't fully honest with you. And sometimes in the moment you knew it immediately, like your story, Brent, of
Yeah.
of that guy. And sometimes you look back and go, wow, I didn't even think about that, but I shaded the truth for my own benefit.
Yeah.
And in learning to be a truth speaker, I need to go back and I need to acknowledge that and ask forgiveness. And I think there's something about that humility of, I'm not always going to do this perfectly, but I'm going to keep coming back and revisiting when I need to. It is like retraining our brain to think differently, to think truth first, and to start to see the value of, if I have nothing to hide, nothing to lose, nothing to cover up. It's a different way of life that many haven't known. And yet it does take that work that goes beyond just the sexual addiction or the struggles we've had with lust and pornography. So
Yeah.
I think it's when our eyes are open to that, it's maybe taking the same level of sincerity and seriousness towards exposing all the patterns of lies in our life that we did to the big one that really maybe brought us into this process.
Yeah. I think too, an extension of not telling secrets, being dishonest, is then beginning to honestly share your emotions, and you see how that creates intimacy in your relationships with your spouse, with your friends, with your children, but then also honesty in identifying your needs. Because what's interesting is when you're able to identify, like, you identified your emotion, you've identified your need, and you're willing to be honest and share those things, uh, believe it or not, when people are more aware of your emotions and your needs, they actually want to help you and they want to like come alongside you and support you. And what's funny is when those emotions and those needs in the past were not acknowledged by other people, that's some of the reason to go back into your old behavior. And so your honesty is almost going that extra step of preventing a relapse because you're actually able to identify the things that you do need and get those things met in the way that I think God intended them to get met. And so I see it's not just outside of not keeping secrets. You start to share even more about what's really going on, and that has benefits.
Yeah, this is a challenge in couples recovery because that can be very triggering for the spouse
Mm-hmm.
as the addict begins to be more honest in these other areas of lying, because then she activates back to the lying about the sexual sin. But it's important to try to understand that the addict is working his way through this and being intentional about being open and honest about everything. So
Yeah.
this is actually progress. It doesn't feel like it maybe.
Yeah, right.
It feels like maybe two steps backwards, but it's actually progress. And if you know she tries to deal with those emotions, can affirm him in that. She doesn't have to be happy about it. It's kind of like when your kid comes and tells you, well, I lied about this. So I'm really disappointed that you did this, but I'm glad you told me.
Right.
If we could use some affirming language of saying, well, this is, I don't accept that, and I'm glad you're working on it.
Yeah.
That can be very helpful, because otherwise, if the reaction is to further shame and blow up and diminish, then that just perpetuates those cycles that were established long ago that they're already stuck in.
Yep.
Yeah, and I mean, I would just underscore that when we have lies in our life, whether they're of sexual addiction nature or not, the person that it most directly affects is probably not the starting point, because we again, and I don't want people to hear me saying, "Oh, you don't have to tell them." That's not it at all. I just want to make sure when you tell them, you're equipped with the ability to be truthful and honest and ready to share that, and not just think, well, if I just tell them, it'll break the pattern, because often it doesn't. It is a process, and you need to start taking steps and be committed to that process even before you get to that point, and then having the support that when it goes sideways or blows up, and
Yeah.
it inevitably will, that you don't just say, well, that was dumb, I'm never doing that again, that wasn't worth it, but you have people you can go back to and say, well, here's how it went, and what do I do now? And they can encourage you to stay in it, to stay in this place and believe
Yeah.
that ultimately you'll see the value and worth coming from it. So